proudly presents One Ocean.
Since the film's release, SeaWorld has been under a lot of pressure from animal rights groups to end these killer whale shows and stop its orca breeding program. It is all part of a much larger question about the usefulness of zoos and aquariums. The Canadian Federation of Humane Societies says there are more than 100 zoos in Canada alone. A common pro-zoo argument states that zoos protect animal species on the verge of extinction. According to the International Union for Conservation of Nature, the world's largest environmental organization, almost 25% of all mammal species are at risk of becoming extinct in the next 3 generations. The outlook is even worse for amphibians and seabirds. Canada's Accredited Zoos and Aquariums is an organization which aims to advance and improve animal exhibits in the country. We have reached its executive director by phone in Ottawa. Massimo Bergamini says none of their aquariums or zoos allow the kind of shows SeaWorld is ceasing. He insists that zoos and aquariums are essential in the conservation of animals.
It is our belief that by reaching out, engaging with people, using the animals in our care to connect with people, that we're going to change attitudes, that we're going to make people care about the world outside, about nature, and transform people. And our hope is that we're going to create, a new generation of conservationists, and not necessarily professional conservation, but people that actually take note of, how their personal habits and behavior affect the planet.
Will Pierce is a researcher at McGill University. His work focuses on evolutionary ecology, which looks at understanding how species around us evolve. For him, there are 2 factors that should be considered when placing an animal in a zoo or aquarium. 1, how adapted it is to the environment, and 2, how intelligent that animal is.
I think something that's important for zoos is the intelligence and how well adapted an animal is to their environment. Killer whales have home ranges that are tens, if not hundreds, if not thousands of kilometres in area. And so keeping an orca in a tank of that size and forcing them to breed in the way that they did is clearly is not in keeping with the way they would naturally be. I think that's most clearly evidenced by the fact that many of the killer whales that were being kept at the SeaWorld aquariums were showing very clear signs of pathology, both psychologically and physiologically. And so those animals were clearly not healthy in that environment, they clearly were not being bred healthily, they clearly were not living healthily. And so I think it's right that that program should stop.
Jan Gogarten is a PhD student in biology at McGill University. He is working on animal behavioral ecology and disease. We reached him by phone at the Robert Koch Institute in Berlin, where he's studying primates as a potential source of disease for humans and how that could affect the 2 species cohabitation. For Gogarten, keeping social animals like monkeys in captivity is similar to locking a human in a cage. He admits that zoos increase public awareness of wild animals, but says that interest could be generated in other ways.
So we now have technology that really allows us to, take people into the wild using a video camera. So some things like the BBC documentaries, the experience people get there is so much more authentic and so much more enriching. I find, even as a wildlife biologist, I find that to be way more compelling and way more getting me more excited about nature and wanting to study nature in the wild than going to the zoo and watching a bunch of animals sleep.
Emily Anderson is a master's student in biology here at Concordia. Her studies include working at the Granby Zoo observing the daily behavior of Japanese macaques. She doesn't think watching documentaries on TV is the same as actually learning from live animals, even if they are in zoos.
So I personally, obviously doing research at a zoo, am a supporter of them, and I think the benefit of it is getting the more personal experience, so being able to actually see these animals interact in a naturalistic or semi-naturalistic environment as opposed to watching them on the TV where it's a little bit more impersonal. So for myself, I know that visiting zoos as a child is definitely one of the things that helped me foster this love of animals and this love of nature, and I think that that's the case for a lot of people.
There is a clear controversy on whether zoos and aquariums are beneficial or detrimental for animals. Is there such a thing as ethical captivity? At McGill University, Will Pierce believes that ethical captivity is possible. when an animal is happier and safer in captivity than it would be in the wild.
I'll give you an example from the London Zoo. There is a room in London Zoo where, for the cost of, I think it's about £30,000 to £40,000 per year, something on the order of 50 to 200 species of snail that otherwise would be extinct are kept going. That room is very small, that room is very cheap to look after, and those snails are kept captive in little boxes. Now, from the perspective of that snail, that box is fine though. Those animals are happy in there, they're not showing any signs of physiological or psychological damage in any sense. They're respiring normally, they're interacting with their environment normally, and they're reproducing normally. To me, that is ethical captivity, because that organism appears to be happy in whatever sense that means for a snail, but also that organism is in a physiological state. That is ethical captivity. Keeping an animal, however, like an orca or a killer whale, in the equivalent of that box, which is basically a SeaWorld tank, to me is not ethical. And I think even if that animal were being kept there to keep that species alive, I ask, what price a species? Because I don't necessarily think keeping a species alive is worth inflicting what I consider to be a form of torture onto an organism.
Emily Anderson agrees, as long as the zoos are providing the animals with what they need.
I think that especially these animals that are born in captivity, raised in captivity, that's their home. So the only other alternative would be, doing what SeaWorld is doing and just stopping breeding animals in captivity completely. Because it's not like we're going out and taking animals from the wild anymore and placing them in zoos. Obviously that would be a bit unfair because you're taking them from a free life to a captive life, and it's a big difference. But if you've been captive all your life, it's what you know. So it's hard to argue that they would be better off in the wild because they don't know any better.